Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. First order of business is the restrooms are out the door and to your left. And if you'd please silence your pagers or ringers. We have people following online on the webinar. And welcome to those of you on the webinar. If you'd like to tweet in a question, our handle is @Children'sOmaha, so feel free to do that. Let's see. So welcome to Surviving the Trying Twos. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Jamie Drake, and she's a pediatrician at our Children's Physicians Dundee office. And also, if you didn't get a raffle ticket to fill it out, we're going to have a little drawing at the end of this. So be sure to get that to the girls at the front desk. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jamie Drake.
Thanks. Hi guys, I'm Jamie Drake. Like she said, I'm a pediatrician over at Children's Physicians in Dundee. And I'm also a mom of two. I've got a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old daughter. So I am proud to say I've survived the trying twos twice, although I think my 3-year-old's trying to give 3 a run for its money. But so we'll see how that ends up. But I think it is kind of an interesting point. You always hear about the terrible twos, which we don't want to call them, so we're saying the trying twos. And I'm not sure where two got such a bad reputation. I think part of it's psychological on the part of parents. We sort of expect babies to be challenging, and I think at 1 we still consider them a baby, so they're still allowed to be really challenging. Then they turn 2, and we expect them to be a child and expect them to grow up and sort of start behaving differently. And there's not really much that's different in the mind of that child from the time that they're 1 day shy of their 2nd birthday to the time that they're 1 day past it. But to parents, it sometimes feels like, okay, you're 2 years old, so now you should start acting like it. And I think sometimes that even makes 3 more difficult because we've set ourselves up to believe that 2 is going to be really challenging. Then they're going to turn 3 and everything's going to get better. And my little one turned 3 exactly 1 month ago, and I'm here to tell you that we're not a whole lot further than we were a month ago in terms of some of the challenges, and that's okay. That's the way that it's supposed to be. So we're just kind of going to go through tonight a lot of different things about not just 2-year-olds, but toddlers in general that can make them really, really fun and also really, really challenging, and ways to approach that to make this a more enjoyable experience for the parents and for the child, because at the end of the day, you really want to enjoy every second with your kids and not have to think about why we're in the age 2 range and things are so difficult. So if anybody has any questions as we go through, feel free to just raise your hand and we can answer stuff as we go. All right, so some of the things about toddlers that make them a lot of fun and also very challenging is that they go through a lot of milestones in their development. They go from being an infant that stays in one place all the time to being able to walk and run and jump and squat, and they can push things and pull things and fill them up and dump them out, and sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean that they're filling a cup up and dumping it in the sink. It might be filling something in the sink and dumping it on your floor. They can open drawers and cabinets, which is fine if all you've got stored in the drawers and cabinets is Thomas the Train or baby dolls, but that's not usually the case for most of us. They can go up and down stairs, which gives them more free reign in your home. They can climb up and down on furniture, and a lot of times they like to use furniture for ladders or step stools. They can scribble, which is great, again, if they're doing it on paper or a coloring book that you provided, not always so great if it's on your wall or the wood floor of your kitchen. They can throw a ball, they can kick a ball. They can throw and kick anything that looks like a ball or could potentially be a ball or just something that's light enough that they can pick it up and move it across the room. So all these things are really fun. It makes them more capable of doing things, and there's a lot more things that they can do and participate in and play. But again, these things also make them a little bit more trouble at times. They also learn during this time to play alongside others. A lot of times at age 2, they still aren't great at playing with other children. So when you have a play date, you might notice that your 2-year-olds will sit next to each other and play, but they're not always engaged in the same type of play. They don't quite grasp often how to do that yet, and you'll see then as they turn 3 and 4 that they tend to play more together and their games become more interactive, which is just really interesting to watch. They do start to play make-believe at this age. And again, this is really, really fun to see, but can make them a little bit more troublesome. They will make believe anything, and if they're make believing barbershop and they happen to get their hands on a scissors, then you might have a disaster on your hands. So again, all these things are really, really fun, but just make them a little more challenging. They start to imitate. They're very affectionate, but they can also be very aggressive. They're possessive, particularly of their parents, and they are extremely, extremely persistent. So they may ask the same question over and over and over until they get the answer that they want. And that might not even be the right answer. Sometimes they'll ask you what color the sky is. You can say blue 25 times in a row, but if they want the answer to be pink, when you finally say pink, they just accept it and move on. They are starting to communicate more. They, at 2, they should be starting to speak in at least a couple word phrases and then eventually stringing words together in sentences. Again, this is where things can become a little more challenging because now they're saying, what's that? What's that? What's that? What's that? What's that? What's that? Or why? They repeat a lot of what you say, which is another challenge. You just have to be really cautious as they get older and older of the things that are said in front of them. Not only the language, but also the content. If you're having a conversation about a friend or a relative or a neighbor that you don't want to get back to that friend or relative or neighbor, you better not have it in front of a toddler. They point to objects and learn their body parts, and they can follow simple instructions. So keep that in mind. They are capable of following simple instructions. So sometimes it doesn't seem like it, but they are. Their speech at age 2 is about 50% intelligible or understandable. By 3, it should be about 75%. This is a source of frustration for a lot of these little ones because they're speaking to you in conversation in full sentences and they think that they're really portraying their wants and their needs. But a lot of times it's really tough to understand exactly what they're saying. They get frustrated, you get frustrated, and that can really escalate pretty quickly. So keep in mind, when they're telling you a story and you're only picking up every other word, they really think that you're understanding everything that they're saying. Slow them down, ask them to repeat because they do get frustrated. And then they tend to use a lot of nonverbal communication, particularly when they're frustrated. And sometimes that's not always as gentle as we would like it to be. It might be grabbing you by the hand and just yanking you over to whatever it is they want that they've been trying to get across for the last few minutes. Sometimes that's where they can get irritated and hit and kick, bite, those kinds of things too. There are a lot of important safety issues for children this age. They, of course, should still be in a car seat. At age 2, we say it's okay for that car seat to be forward-facing, although you can leave it rear-facing for longer. But they should be still secured in a car seat in the back seat of the car with a 5-point harness. Locks on the doors become more and more important as children get older and taller and can turn doorknobs. And to keep them inside of that house and prevent them from getting into things that they're not supposed to get into. This is the age 2 where childproofing becomes more important. Again, the level at which you have to childproof gets higher and higher and higher as these kids get older and older and older, because anything to them that's in your house is a stool or a ladder. And if they see a cupboard and it's up high, they're going to try to figure out a way to get to it. So you need to keep things even that are up high pretty safe. Chemicals and medications, anything that's potentially hazardous to the child should be kept locked up. And it's best probably just to kind of have all this stuff in one location that you make sure you're always keeping that cupboard locked. Don't trust the child-proof mechanisms that are on medication bottles and chemical bottles. You should have that stuff all locked up. There are a lot of things that are choking hazards: small toys, food, coins, pretty much anything that's within their reach can become hazardous. So again, it's more important at this age to keep your floors tidy, keep everything put away, and everything out of their reach. You should have smoke and carbon monoxide detectors in your house and check to make sure that those are in working order. Sometimes a good rule of thumb is just to have a day of the year that you remember to check those. So for a lot of people, they choose a holiday because it's a day that you'll remember. You know, pick Halloween, and on Halloween every year you check and make sure your smoke detectors and carbon monoxide sensors are in working order. Most of them have built-in mechanisms to let you know, but it's never hurts to check. And also check your hot water heater. That's something that we say to do with infants, but it's probably actually more important with toddlers who are more likely to get up in the bathtub or get up to the sink and potentially turn on the water. You want to make sure that your hot water heater isn't set at too high of a setting that could put them at risk for burn if they turned the water all the way to hot. Now for me to check the setting on my hot water heater would be a little bit of a challenge because I'm not sure if I go into my utility room, I'm quite certain which thing I'm looking at is the hot water heater, but either have someone in your house that knows what's what, do it, or ask someone to check it for you. We recommend that those be set at 120 degrees or lower for maximum heat. And a lot of the hot water heater standard is 140 degrees. So if you've never checked it, it may be set to be a little bit higher than what's recommended. Essentially, based on all the things that we've just talked about, toddlers have to be watched constantly. They really can't be left to their own devices. They will get into trouble. It's amazing how much can happen in 30 seconds when you turn your back on a little one. And it never ceases to amaze me if I walk out of the room for 10 seconds and go back to my 3-year-old, what she's decided to do it and how much trouble she's getting herself into just because she knows that I'm not in the room. Indoors, again, make sure you have locks on everything, safe storage. If there's any firearms in the home, we recommend that those be locked and locked separately from ammunition, which should also be locked. Outdoors, you want to ideally have the child in a fenced-in yard with a gate that latches and locks. If you are counting on a fence to keep your child contained and there's a gate that doesn't lock, I guarantee you they will figure out a way to get out. These are smart little creatures. And like I said, they'll find something in the yard that's a step if they're not tall enough to reach the gate. We're going to talk about some feeding issues. I think mealtime is often a source of frustration for parents of young children. Generally speaking, little ones need 3 meals and 2 snacks a day. And the biggest goal is to avoid food fights that happen often with toddlers during meal times. They don't really want to reason with you, and they don't understand what that means. So the best thing that you can do is not engage in the argument. You are the parent, they're the child, you're making the decisions, and they're following the rules. And if you have that sort of an attitude as your approach to these things, you will always win. Because they can't make their own meal. They can't go to the grocery store and buy their own food. And so ultimately, you do hold their fate in your hands when it comes to what kind of foods they're going to eat. You want to encourage healthy eating habits to the best of your ability. And remember that for the most part, kids this age will eat when they're hungry. So if you're having a meal that's a particular struggle and you're worried they're not going to eat anything and they're going to be hungry later, they probably will. And the next time when they come to sit down for the meal, they'll have learned, I guess I need to eat when the food's in front of me, even if it's not exactly what I wanted at that time. Kids, oh yeah, go ahead.
Our boy was premature, and so he didn't really get the eating thing down right away. And now that he's started to eat pretty good, we're having the difficulty of him actually eating the food. He likes to chew it up and then spit it out. Do you have any advice to help that?
I think it would depend on your situation. If he's got medical concerns that put him at higher risk for weight loss, I think you're going to have to, find ways to work around that, giving him textures that he prefers and those kinds of things. If you think this is simply a behavior that he's doing, that he's sort of trying to show you that he's the boss, when he starts doing that behavior, I'd probably take the food away. Toddlers go through these food lags, which is really, really normal, but can be very frustrating. They will go through periods where they only want to eat 2 or 3 different foods. For every single meal, they want chicken nuggets, chicken nuggets, chicken nuggets. And then one time, you make them chicken nuggets, and they push them away and won't eat them. And it is so, so frustrating, but so normal. And they really, really resist a lot of variety on their plate. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't encourage them to try. As a general rule of thumb, you should put everything on their plate that you're eating. So everything that you're having for dinner, there should be a little bit of on their plate. Now, if you know darn well they're not going to eat green beans. Don't waste 25 of your good green beans on them, but put a few on their plate so that at least they have the opportunity to try. Because what will happen is you'll find yourself in a cycle where you never put the foods on their plate that you think they don't like, and you'll miss that opportunity where they might have looked around at everybody else at the table and went, I guess I'll eat it. And so you want to always make sure that that opportunity is there. By the same token, if there are certain things that they are less likely to eat or eat less often, like certain vegetables or fruits or meat or whatever the case may be for your child, put those things on their plate first, the beginning of the meal when they're the most hungry, and add the things to the plate that they prefer towards the end of the meal. They're more likely to try those new foods if it's what's available when they're at their hungriest. If they love fruit and there's a bunch of fruit on their plate at the beginning of the meal, they're going to eat that all first, and then they might be full and resist taking a bite of roast beef. They will change their minds over and over and over. So if you ask them what they want for lunch and make what they said, a lot of times by the time they get to the table, they've decided that's no longer what they want anymore. Try not to give in to that all the time. The probably exception to that is when you've made something for dinner and you know in your mind the whole time you're making it, there's a really, really good chance they're not going to eat it. I think it's probably okay to offer them one alternative option. So if you've made fish and you think, well, we'll see, but they probably aren't going to like this, and offer that to them. And if they say, I don't want this, I want, then offer them a couple other choices. Let them pick one thing. If you put that in front of them and they won't eat it, then that's it. The meal's over. They don't get to make any other options. You know, you need to sit down and eat your meal too. You're not a short order cook, and this is not time for you to be standing in front of the stove cooking thing after thing after thing. Chances are you'd never satisfy you. One way to encourage them to try new things is to make your meals colorful and interesting. So if there's different colors on the plate, different textures on the plate, dips, kids love being able to dip their food in things. So if you have options for them to kind of play with their food a little bit, they will probably be more likely to try new things. So vegetables that aren't their favorite, with a dip available that they can dip them in, will probably encourage them to try some bites of that. Be cautious of things that are choking hazards, things like hot dogs, carrots and celery, globs of peanut butter, which I think sometimes people don't think about, but even as an adult, peanut butter tends to stick to the roof of your mouth and can be hard to swallow. So make sure if you're feeding those things to your kids that everything is either cut up really small or with peanut butter spread in a really thin layer. Nuts, particularly peanuts, but really any nuts, are a choking hazard, and kids under the age of 4 or 5 shouldn't be getting whole nuts. Popcorn can be a problem too, so be careful with that. Round or hard candies or gum are choking hazards for little ones. Grapes that aren't cut up, that are in the skin. Marshmallows can be a choking hazard. So all those things are things to be cautious of. It's not that they can't eat them, it's just that they need to be prepared a little bit differently for little ones. At meal times, make sure you're leading by example. You are your little one's biggest inspiration, so they're going to be watching everything that you do. They want to be like you. So if you want them to eat their meat and fruits and vegetables, you better be eating your meat and fruits and vegetables too. You should be sitting as a family as often as possible for mealtime. And this means that everybody's engaged, so not watching television, not playing on your iPhone, and I'm as guilty as anyone of that. But it's important to try to remember to put all that stuff away at mealtime and just have a good family meal. Again, offer them all the foods that everyone else is eating, and let the kids get involved with the meal. This will probably make them more likely to be a willing participant in everything that's going on. Let them help choose the meals, whether you're a planner that sets all their meals at the beginning of the week or the beginning of the month, or if you're like me and you're at 6 o'clock frantically looking through the cupboard to try to find something to eat for the night. Let your kids get involved. At least give them a couple of choices and let them help decide what's going to be on the meal for the night. Let them help prepare things that they can, whether it's stirring something that's not on the stove yet, or arranging food on a platter, helping set the table. They really enjoy all that stuff. They want to be with you while you're at home. So, yeah.
I don't know, being a kid, you know, they want to play and they want to mess everything up, you know, because it's fun and everything. And I always feel like such a spoil sport when my boy's making a horrible mess of his meal. And I was just wondering if there's a balance between eating your food and playing with it, because I remember somebody saying that it's, you know, good for him to feel the textures and you know, like green beans, for example, you know, they got the little things inside of them,
Yeah.
what's this and everything.
Yeah.
But
It's a good question. I mean, I think they do want to explore and they like to feel the food and feel those textures. And if there's dips, they kind of like to mix and move things around on their plate. And I think that's probably all okay within reason. The caveat is they have to be eating. So if they're just playing and making a mess and they're not eating, then they shouldn't probably be allowed to do that. But if they're messing around with their food, moving it around on their plate, they're getting a little dirtier than you would like them to, you just have to take a deep breath. If they're eating, then it's fine. They will learn over time now if they're throwing food on the floor, smearing food on the table, smearing food on themselves, you can stop them from that. If they've got food on their plate or food on their tray and they're moving it around and making a little bit of a mess, I think that's probably okay. You want to start introducing utensils, having them try to use those for softer foods and purees or things that they can poke with a plastic fork. But if you have dips, things that they can move around, you know.
so is that something maybe you should take the food away for a minute and explain to them? You know, we're not playing, we're eating.
Yes, I think so. And then you give it back and you give them one more chance. And if they still are playing or throwing food or smearing food, then you take it away and be done. And they can still sit at the table while the rest of the family finishes the meal. All right, so nap time, another often huge source of struggle for toddlers. Nap time should be ideally at about the same time every day. And it really helps if you give kids this age a warning. If they're in the middle of doing something and you walk into the room and say, okay, nap time, that's not gonna go well. You're kind of setting yourself up for a meltdown. If you give them a heads up, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes in advance, and give them a couple of warnings, you're going to be able to play for 5 more minutes and then it's going to be time for a nap. Sometimes that'll ease that transition a little bit. The room should be quiet and dark. And ideally, like I said, the same time or roughly the same time each day. And as toddlers grow, this sometimes morphs from sleep time into quiet time. So as they grow out of their need for nap, it's still good for them to have some quiet rest time in their room for a set period of time each day where they should be just resting on their bed, even if they aren't asleep. You can't make them go to sleep, no matter how much you'd like to be able to. But if they're in a dark, quiet room and they're tired, they'll fall asleep, actually. Same thing goes for bedtime. Again, here routine is really key. So the same time each night is ideal, and you're going to be much more successful if you're getting them to bed around the same time. And having a bedtime routine. So bath time, toothbrushing, story time, and bed. If you do the same routine each night, it helps them prepare. They know what's coming. They know that after they brush their teeth and read a story, it's time to get in bed, and they can kind of start to calm themselves that way. Once it's bedtime and they're in bed, there are no excuses and no negotiations. They are in bed for the night, and that's it. And if they come out of their room, they're back in bed. If they come out of their room, they're back in bed. Don't fall for they're starving, they're thirsty. My little one likes to use the excuse that we forgot to floss every single night, over and over and over, even though we flossed most nights. And just redirect them and put them back in their bed. And you may do it many, many times those first few nights while you're kind of breaking them of bad habits. But eventually, they'll stay. And once they get used to this routine, it helps kind of calm them down and set them up and get them ready for bed. They're persistent, but again, you're in charge. So just don't let them win. They win one time, they come out, you let them come out, you let them sit down with you and watch TV, you let them crawl in bed with you. That's a huge victory for them, and you're setting yourself up for a lot of long nights. Screen time for kids this age should be very limited. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no screen time under the age of 2, and then after no more than 2 hours a day, which is everything: television, looking at your iPhone, looking at your iPad, looking at a computer screen, all that stuff combined. And the biggest thing is you want to really keep track of the content of what they're watching. So don't turn on the Disney Channel and then go in the other room and leave them there for 2 hours watching. Even these channels that are geared for children may have things that are not the best for a 2-year-old to be watching. And if it's a show that they always watch, you have to be a little cautious of what's coming up next, because it may be something that you don't want them to be watching. You want them to mostly be watching television that's educational. And I would be a hypocrite if I told you that my kids don't watch TV, because they do, because sometimes you need to get a load of laundry done, you need to get your dishes done, you need to get your dinner going. But again, you just want to really monitor what it is they're watching. And lead by example. You should limit your own screen time when your kids are around and not have television on as background noise all day. Even if the television's on and they're not watching it, they're hearing some of it, they're picking some of it up. So if it's on programming that's not appropriate for them, they are listening. And if you have that television on all day in the background, they're going to learn, this is what we do, this is how we play with television in the background. You're better to put on music or just nothing and let them use their imaginations. And it's okay to enjoy some television together. Sit down and talk about, if they're watching a show on any TV, talk about what's going on, or if they're doing a letter game or a number game, you guys can enjoy that together. Yeah.
I heard in a recent study that SpongeBob is the least educational program for kids. And well, of course, that's what
that's the favorite
all the time. Yes, SpongeBob 24/7. Is there a good way to kind of get them to forget about it in a way? I guess you would say.
Well, I think you could, if you're going to do a small amount of television each day, just have it be something else. Again, you're really in control of the situation because it's your remote and your TV. And you're in charge. So if you decide there's something that you don't want them to watch, you just don't let them watch it. And I know I make that sound really easy, and it's not, because I have these same arguments with my kids. But a couple summers ago, I think it was maybe last summer, I noticed my 6-year-old was getting a little sassier than I would like. And I was trying to figure out where it was coming from, because she was just home all day, and I couldn't figure out. And then I noticed she was watching a couple programs on the Disney Channel that were nothing really wrong with them, but probably geared towards a little bit older age than what she needed. And we had her stop watching those, and the behavior disappeared immediately. So they really do mirror what they see on television. So you have to be careful with that. All right. Oh, yeah.
And then I actually want to go back a little bit with the bedtime thing. We're raising our kid in separate homes, and ever since he's always gone to bed in his bed at my house and gone to bed with Mama at her house. And we're trying to get him to sleep in his bed all the time now, and it's not being easy.
Yeah, sure.
He goes to bed for Brandon right away, and for me, he freaks out. He's in his crib.
So I think probably part of that is going to be having communication between the two of you, so that as much as you can, it's a different routine when they're in different locations for bedtime, but as much as you can, try to make the routine the same. So make sure you're doing things at the same time, you're starting the bedtime routine at the same time, doing things in the same order as much as you can, so that he starts to develop that as part of his routine, and hopefully that'll help with that transition back and forth between the homes. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about potty training. I'm just going to touch on this briefly. We could talk about this for a couple of hours easily, I think, and still maybe not make too much headway, so we'll talk just a little bit. But as you start to think about potty training your toddler, look for some signs that they're ready. If you start trying to potty train too soon, you're just going to drive yourself crazy. So watch for signs that they're ready. Some of those things may be that they're dry during naps. So if they're consistently every nap time waking up with a wet diaper, they probably aren't ready to potty train yet. That they can follow simple instructions, that they are mobile, that they can walk and run and get themselves to the toilet. They're interested in the toilet. That they're talking well enough that they can verbalize to you that they need to use the bathroom. And then that they are capable of sitting still for a few minutes at a time, which for a lot of toddlers is probably the most challenging one. When you start toilet training, make sure that you're having them sit on the toilet frequently, and watch for cues that they need to go. You know, jumping around, bouncing around can be signs. Good times to try are after meals and after nap times. Those are times when you're likely to have success. Make sure that you give them lots and lots of praise for success and avoid any negativity or punishment for accidents. When you've had some success over a period of time, don't be afraid to try underwear. These are smart kids, and they know and can tell the difference. They know if they've got a pull-up on versus underwear, and a lot of times just getting them into underwear when you've had some success is what will actually get them completely trained. All right, now we're going to talk probably for most of the rest of the time about discipline. And there's kind of two big points we're going to touch on, which is ways to encourage good behavior and ways to limit bad behavior. So we're going to go through these a little bit here. So first of all, some common mistakes I think that people make when disciplining toddlers. Trying to reason or have a discussion with a 2 or 3-year-old will be probably a waste of your time. They are not really capable of reasoning. So if you find yourself in, as I say this out loud, I can remember multiple times that I've done this and then kind of have to step back and say, okay, why am I wasting my breath trying to reason with my 2-year-old? If you're down on your knees trying to negotiate with them and saying, don't you understand why that makes me upset? Well, no, they probably don't. And so having that type of conversation isn't really going to get you too far. Other mistakes, having consequences that are too remote. So if they're doing something that you don't want them to repeat and you say, well, then in 3 weeks, we're not going to go to grandma's. They don't know what that means. They don't really care or get that. Also, if you find out that they had a bad behavior, say at daycare in the morning, and then you put them in timeout in the evening, that's probably not going to be very successful because they really don't remember the behavior and they don't understand why they're in the timeout. Try to avoid yelling for the sake of yelling. Again, I've done this 1,000 times, but I try to remember not to. You'll find yourself getting into this cycle where your voice gets a little louder and a little louder and a little louder, and your kids are just staring at you. What's going on? Mom's loud, and I have no idea why. So try to keep your voice as calm as you can and just make your point. Inconsistency is a huge problem, and sometimes it's just difficult, especially if you have a child that's in multiple locations throughout the day. If you have a child that spends some time in daycare and is home with you part of the time, you need to try to be as consistent as you can with what the consequences are so that everybody that's taking care of the child is following kind of the same rules, because otherwise it gets really confusing. Why can I get away with this at grandma's but not get away with it at home? So keeping that as consistent as you can. And then not following through. You don't want to make empty threats because they're smart and they figure that out, and then they realize, well, they always say they're going to do this, but they never do. Or, they say we're not going to go for ice cream tonight, but we did anyway. So then that actually reinforces the behavior in the wrong way. So ways to encourage good behavior. I think one of the most important things to understand is you have to model good behavior for these little ones. They don't inherently know what you want them to do and what you don't want them to do. So you need to teach them by example the types of behaviors that you want them to engage in. And make sure you're offering positive reinforcement for good behavior. That's probably the hardest thing to remember to do as a parent. When your kids are acting really appropriately, or they're playing on their own, or sitting on the floor playing quietly with a game, that's when you sneak off and get other stuff done. That's when you're getting your housework done, doing your laundry. Maybe you're just sat down for the first time for the last 8 hours. But try to remember at least a few times a day when they're doing stuff really, really well to stop and really praise them for that. You're doing a really good job of just sitting on the floor and playing nicely by yourself. They really like to hear that, and I think sometimes in the course of a busy day we just forget to do that a little bit, and that is probably just as important as any punishments that you're going to do over the course of the day, and maybe more. Also make sure that you are giving them recognition if you give them a job to do or ask them to do something and they do it. So even if it's just something as simple as, can you take this toy and put it back in this basket, and then they do it, and then they come back and you don't acknowledge that they did it for you. The next time you might have a little bit of a struggle if you ask them to do it. So make sure that you're reinforcing that all these things are great and how much you appreciate it. It's great to give them rewards for good behavior. And for a 2-year-old, these do not have to be big rewards. Maybe a little extra one-on-one time. So if you do X, Y, and Z, then before you go to bed tonight, we can play a game. They really enjoy that. They like stickers, like I said, like playing games, reading an extra story before bed. Maybe if they've done something really, really well, the reward is that on Friday you go to the park or whatever the case may be. Be sure you're not making promises that you can't keep. So don't tell them that you will take them out for ice cream and then you realize, okay, actually we have baseball practice and 2 other things going on tonight and we're not gonna be able to do this. Because they remember that too. And it's gonna make them harder for them to want to do the behavior the next time. They get angry pretty easily. So. Yeah.
Question actually for 3 of the topics here between bedtime and rewards and whatnot. Like a bedtime story, is that could that be a good gateway for the transition to bed?
Yeah, for a lot of kids, I think reading stories is a really, really good thing to do right before they go to sleep. If they're sitting quietly in lines and lying still and engaged while you read a story, that helps them kind of quiet their minds down. Some kids want to read the same story every single night, and that can get really old. I can think of at least 10 toddler and childhood books that I have memorized and wouldn't even have to look at any of the pages to read it. But if that's what they like and that's what they need for their routine, it's probably worth reading the same book every night, because if that's part of their routine of going to bed, and it's going to make it easier for you in the long run, you might as well just go through that book that you've read 100 times one more time. In a situation where you've got a child in separate homes, that might be really beneficial if they have a book that they like and they've got the same book in both households that you could read and make that part of their routine. Yep. So. All right. What we really want to focus on with these little ones is limiting their bad behavior. And if you can be successful at this, then you'll really, really enjoy these toddler years. So what is bad behavior for a toddler? Things that are irritating and annoying to others, which is often a lot of the things that they do. Pouting and whining, arguing, anything violent, and then tantrums. These are all the things that you kind of want to try to limit. So what do you do with bad behavior? Well, the vast majority of the time, you can just ignore it. So if it's something that's just a little bit irritating or annoying, but not really that harmful, or they're throwing a tantrum, the best thing to do is ignore the behavior altogether, particularly tantrums. If they're tantruming for no reason or for no good reason and you know that, just ignore them and pretend that they are not there. Their main goal with that tantrum is to get your attention. And if they don't get attention from the tantrum, then eventually the behavior will eliminate itself. But you have to be really careful, and this is what I have the hardest time with, is not laughing when they're doing a behavior like that when you're trying to ignore it. So if you have to turn your back because you're gonna laugh, and also not letting yourself get angry. So don't decide you're gonna ignore the tantrum and then get really, really angry until you burst and yell at them to stop. You just really, really have to ignore it. Sometimes if they're, they've thrown themselves on the kitchen floor and are laying there kicking and screaming, actually turning your back on them and walking out of the room so that they can see, I guess they're ignoring me, is really, really helpful. And kids are really good at throwing tantrums, and they will do it anywhere. So they don't really care if you are in your home alone with the door shut where no one's going to hear the tantrum, or if you're in the middle of the aisle at Target. They'll throw the tantrum and you still want to ignore it. And it's harder to do in public places. I've gotten a lot of funny looks at Target. Target is, I guess, always where I am when this happens, but I've gotten a lot of funny looks there when I've got my back turned to my 2-year-old who's laying on the floor crying. But you just shrug your shoulders and they're not going to hurt themselves. The tantrum will end, and then they pick themselves back up and you move on. No should mean no, and no can be a really effective word, but you have to use it sparingly. I think you find yourselves getting into these cycles of saying no to everything. So they're doing something that you just sort of don't want them to do, but it's not really that big of a deal. Try to find another way to approach it than saying no. Because what you want is that when they are running away from you and going to run out into the street and there's a car coming and you say no, you want them to stop, because no has a meaning to them. It's not just something that they've become a little bit numb to because they hear it 5,000 times a day. So tantrums. Toddlers will throw tantrums for almost any reason, just to get attention. If they're afraid, if they're really excited, sometimes they'll throw a tantrum. Stressed out, bored, tired, in pain, they're hungry. I came across a blog that someone had sent me a link to a few weeks back, and maybe some of you have seen it. It's called Reasons My Child is Crying. And if you haven't seen it, you should look at it. It's very, very humorous, and I can't vouch for anything else that's on that blog, so don't hold me to anything else that's there. But this is a photo blog that a gentleman has taken pictures of his toddler crying with captions sort of explaining the scenario. And it's very funny, and it's so true. One of the ones that I liked the most was he asked for cheese. I gave him cheese. And he's got his face down on his high chair, just throwing a tantrum. So, and it's really funny, and it's so true if you look at that stuff. That is what these toddlers do. They change their mind at the drop of a hat. You never have any idea what's going to set them off. Sometimes it's really hard to prevent it. So what do? You ignore it, and they eventually learn, this is not an acceptable way to approach my frustrations. Got to figure out a different way. Try not to make excuses for their tantrums. Again, that whole list of reasons of why kids throw tantrums is really easy to say, well, I know they're tired, or I know they're hungry. So you pick them up and let them have the tantrum and hold them. But the list is so long that if you make an excuse for every you probably could make an excuse for every tantrum that they have. But if you do, you're reinforcing the behavior. Now, you want to try to avoid those situations. So if you know that your kid has a meltdown every single day at 3 o'clock if they didn't get their 2 o'clock snack, give them their 2 o'clock snack. But if you're, out and about and you're busy and somehow it got missed and they throw a tantrum, you still don't want to reinforce the tantrum. You wait until the tantrum's over, they've recovered, and then you can give them their snack. So again, you ignore with no eye contact, no discussion during the tantrum, no yelling, no laughing, and then when it's over, just redirect them. And it is okay to use timeouts as a negative reinforcement for a tantrum. But you don't want to put them in timeout while they're in the tantrum, and that's really the key. Because if you take a child that's throwing a tantrum to timeout while they're throwing a tantrum, they just won, because now they've got your attention. And that's what they want. So even if it's your attention because you're irritated and you're taking them over to timeout, they still got your attention. And our kids love us, and they want to make us happy, and I really believe that. Except for toddlers don't really care if you're happy or mad. If they've got your attention, it doesn't really matter to them how you feel. It's all about how they feel. So if they feel rewarded, it doesn't matter to them that much what emotion you're having at the time. And sometimes you need to take a little bit of a time out for yourself. So keep in mind when you are getting frustrated with your toddlers, is it just that the behavior is annoying to you, or are they actually misbehaving? And sometimes I think if you take a step back, sort of think that through, you'll find that a lot of the things that they do are a little annoying, but maybe not a huge problem. And some of those things can probably be accepted. Recognize when you've overreacted and try to redirect yourself to and make sure that you don't overreact to the same thing the next time around. And sometimes you just need to take a breather, step outside, scream because they're driving you crazy, and then go back and readdress the situation. Consequences and punishments for toddlers need to be very concrete so that they can understand that this is a consequence, and they need to be immediate. Be very careful of handing out punishments that you don't want to follow through on or that you aren't going to be able to follow through on. So if you have plans for your child to spend the weekend with their grandparents because you're going out of town, don't tell them that as a punishment they're not going to be able to go to their grandparents, because they are going to their grandparents because you're going out of town. So don't threaten with things that you can't follow through on. I think that sometimes that's a hard thing too, because sometimes some of the consequences that we give kids are a little bit of a punishment to ourselves. And so you have to decide, when are you going to be willing to follow through on that stuff. Timeouts are a great consequence for little ones when you use them correctly. So again, the timeout has to be, yeah.
But like on timeouts, is there like a general rule of thumb for how long you should have a timeout?
Yeah, we'll talk about that as we go through here, yeah.
Sorry, I'm jumping the gun.
So the timeout should follow the behavior immediately. So again, we kind of alluded to this earlier, but if your 2-year-old hits a kid at daycare at 10 o'clock in the morning and you pick them up at 5 o'clock and take them home and put them in timeout, they don't get that. They don't understand why they're being punished. And so they're mad about the timeout, and the timeout meant nothing to them, and so it's just kind of a lose-lose. So if you're going to use timeout as a consequence, it's important that everybody that's watching the child during the day be willing to follow through with that same consequence. And timeouts can be carried out anywhere. And again, I come back to Target, because I happen to know the 2 or 3 aisles in Target that get frequented the least, and that's where my kids do their timeouts in Target. And they are smart, and they will learn. If I do this in a restaurant, nothing happens, because we don't do timeout in a restaurant. So I'll do it in the restaurant, but not at home. So you want to give them that consequence everywhere. You can find a corner or a step to sit on in any location. So there's places to go to timeout at the zoo. There's places to go to timeout at the store, a restaurant, a basketball game. You can do it anywhere, because you don't want them to learn ways around good behavior. And make sure that you're very consistent. So every time they're doing a bad behavior, you want to put them timeout, even if it's inconvenient for you. And like we said, make sure that all caregivers are participating in that. So the timeout procedure, you warn them once, and then if the behavior continues, they go to timeout. If in your home, it's best to have a designated place for timeouts that's quiet and boring, with not a lot of stimulation, so you don't want to have them do a timeout in the middle of their play area. And a general rule of thumb is 1 minute for each year of age. As your child gets smarter, they may need more time, because they start to figure out that 2 minutes isn't very long, and I'll just make it through the timeout. So you may need to extend that time as you've done timeout a little longer to make it more effective. And only count the time during timeout as effective timeout time if they're complying. So if they're throwing a tantrum in timeout, that doesn't count. And if they're coming in and out of timeout, that doesn't count. If they're sitting there smiling or talking to themselves or counting, that's okay. You can let them get away with that. And try not to give them attention during the timeout. If they leave, put them back, but don't try to lecture or reason with them or explain to them why they're in trouble during the timeout. If you want to talk about that afterwards, that's okay. And then it's okay to give them some positive reinforcement after the timeout. So if they were compliant, they sat in timeout for 2 minutes, you can give them some praise, then thanking them for sitting nicely in timeout. And sometimes for kids that are tougher to get to go in timeout, because the timeout itself can be a bit of a chore, it's okay to even practice timeouts when they're not in trouble, and then give them positive reinforcement for sitting in timeout. So say, we're going to practice doing timeout. You're going to sit for 30 seconds, and if you sit nicely, then you can get a sticker on your chart for complying with timeout, and that's okay to do. Yeah.
I remember when I was in timeout, my mom used the egg timer, and that gave the audible tick, 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 you're in trouble.
Sure.
Wait until it goes off. Do you think that's a good thing to have, to let them know that it's going to be this long? That way they're not, am I done yet? Am I done yet?
Yeah, I think that would be fine. Sometimes I'll set the timer on the microwave, and then when the beeps go off, that the timeout's over. But you don't want them to run out of timeout and go straight back to whatever they're doing. They need to come and either sit and wait for you to come and get them, or come and find you, and you guys talk about what happened and apologize for the behavior. Yeah.
We just put our son in his room because we found when we tried just to make him sit on a chair, he just would never just sit on the chair. I mean, it just was ridiculous. You know, he'd spend a half hour trying to get him just to sit still for 1 minute. You know what I mean? So we just put him in his room. However, there are other things in his room that he will find, you know, a book or whatever. So are you saying that's probably not very effective because
It's probably not quite as effective because he may just learn, "No, I'll just go play in my, I got in trouble, so now I just go play in my room with the door shut." And the other one thing to be a little cautious about using bedrooms for timeout is you don't want them to start to have a negative association with their bedroom, because then you're going to have trouble with bedtime at night. So sometimes, depending on your situation, that's the only place that's quiet. But then I'd just try to have as minimal stuff in there as you can, so that he's just kind of in there on his own. All right. The other thing is you want to try to give your children some control over the situation if you can, letting them choose their own rewards and maybe even choosing their own consequences. Kids this age get so tired of every decision being made for them. They really don't have a lot of control over their own lives. And sometimes if you give them a little bit of power to make their own choices, that can really, really help with their overall attitude, especially when it's something that doesn't really matter. So if you're making dinner, let them choose what kind of fruit they want. It probably doesn't make any difference to you if you cut up an apple or if you cut up a pear. So let them choose, and they really feel empowered by that. Clothing, that's a spot where I've really personally struggled and have finally kind of had to let that go. I like my kids to match. I like everything to be so-so, and I think you will find that if you let them make some of their own choices, they feel really happy about that. And as long as they're age-appropriate and weather-appropriate, when they're going to school or daycare, it probably doesn't matter that much if their outfit is completely as you envisioned it when you looked at it in the store. So give them a little bit of control over their own life. And remember too that the answer doesn't always have to be no. I think you find yourself getting into those cycles sometimes where, can we go outside in the rain? No. Can I, have a piece of candy? No. Can I do this? Can I have a glass of water? No. Wait, yes, you can have a glass of water. So sometimes I think you have to make sure that you're considering each question that they ask you. And sometimes I think you find yourself saying no to, will you color with me? No, because I'm busy doing other stuff. And then step back. Actually, yes, I will color with you, because that's not an unreasonable request to ask your parent to spend a little one-on-one time with you, even if you don't really have the time at the moment. All right, so we talked about that a little bit. Make sure that you're spending a lot of time enjoying your little one. This is a really, really fun age. They change so fast and change so much every day. And you want to have a lot of good memories of these toddler years. So enjoy engaging with them in the things that they like to do: reading, singing, coloring, playing games. It makes you feel really good too. Even if you have 1,000 things on your list of things to do and they want you to take time to dance to a song, I guarantee you when you get done doing that dance, you'll feel a lot better, and your day will be better because of it, because toddlers are really, really fun people to be with. So this is just kind of summary thoughts, and again, making sure that you're encouraging and modeling good behavior. Your attention is a reward, and that can be very powerful, so make sure you use it well. Be very consistent, follow through, and then just have a lot of fun, because these years go really, really fast, and the next thing you know, your kids are in elementary school, and you are giving a talk and say you have a 6-year-old and 3-year-old, and you can't believe you're saying those words out loud. So, all right, so then I'll open it up for questions, and I think we have a drawing too. So, yeah.
The whole no thing. You notice that that's one of his favorite words anymore. You ask him, you want to be. Will you put your coat on? No. You want to go potty? No.
It's probably because he's heard it a lot, right? I mean,
but is there a way that we can get him off of that?
Oh, probably not. You can ask him to choose a different, you need to choose a different word, or just sort of ignore all those no's that he's saying, or stop asking him, do you want to put your coat on? Because he's going to say no, and you're going to make him put his coat on anyway. So just, try to stop asking him 1,000 questions, that he has the opportunity to use that word 1,000 times a day. And
not necessarily the questions, just his response.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I don't know if you have any ideas on this. Our son loves to be in his pajamas. And in the morning, it is really hard just to get him. I've tried to give him choices of different clothes to wear. His choice is his pajamas, and it's really frustrating. And when we're in a hurry trying to get him out of that, what are some suggestions you have?
I think one of the things that you can do is maybe use wearing his pajamas for the day as a reward, so that it's not something that he can do every day, but maybe if you say, on Saturday you can stay in your pajamas until noon if you are good about putting your clothes on every day this week. Some of these struggles are so funny because why does he care if he's in sweatpants and a t-shirt or his pajamas that feel exactly the same? And it's sometimes hard to get inside of the head of that toddler and understand what goes through their mind, but they get so stuck on something. A lot of times you can use that to your advantage if you use it as a reward. So if you don't argue with us this whole week about putting on your pajamas before you go to daycare or school, then maybe on Saturday morning we'll make pancakes and stay in our pajamas till noon, and everybody will do it. So, yeah.
My son is into biting. I've heard some people bite him back. I've heard soap. I've heard smack him, on the mouth. I've heard putting timeout.
So I think timeout is probably the most effective. The trouble with things like bite them back is then they learn to keep biting. And then you'll just be biting each other, and then you'll be dropping your 7th grader off, and you tell him he can't stay after school to do whatever, and he'll bite you. No, I mean, that won't happen, but you don't want to bite them back because then they learn violent behavior. So I still think timeout is very effective. But again, the thing with that is you have to be doing it every single time. So no matter where he is, if he's at home with you or at daycare or at grandparents' house, if he bites someone, he has to be going to timeout right away. And especially for violent behaviors like that, it's really important to have consistent consequences because you really want to eliminate those kinds of behaviors. Other questions? Go ahead.
Car seats. So when I think of rewards, I worry that there's going to then be the expectation that he always has to have a reward to do what is expected. But lately, to get into the car seat, it's like, I have to get physical and pin him in.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I just worry that if I give him a sticker every time he sits in nicely, that then if I don't have a sticker one day, that he's not going to sit in his car seat. We're going to have to repeat, or is it just worth buying a whole bunch of stickers or Tic Tacs?
I think it's probably worth buying a whole bunch of stickers because the thing is they get stuck on these behaviors, but only for so long. So just like with the thing with pajamas, eventually he won't care anymore, and you never really understand what flips that switch and what makes them. He'll move on to some other new obsession. He'll want to take a certain car with them every day, or it won't be the car seat anymore. It'll be putting on their coat. But if you use a reward system like stickers, stickers is not unreasonable. It's not unhealthy. It's not a real economical impact to your life, and you can have bigger rewards. So if you get 20 stickers of 20 times of maybe not just getting in your car seat, but of not arguing at all about getting in the car seat, and you get a sticker, and then if you get 10 or 20 or whatever it is, then we'll go out for ice cream or whatever that reward that might really motivate them is. So I think that's okay. Yeah.
And I probably could look back, but is there a particular, a good window of TV time for a toddler? He's in one of any given 4 places during the week with us, and I don't think at daycare they do any TV, but between mom's house, dad's house, and grandma and grandpa's, we don't really know how much time he's spending in front of the TV because we never really keep track of it. But with the whole SpongeBob thing, if he watches SpongeBob at grandma and grandpa's house for 4 hours, and then he comes to daddy's house and watches it for another hour, that's A, a lot of TV time, and B, a lot of SpongeBob time.
Right. So the recommendation is no more than 2 hours of screen time a day, and I think for a 2-year-old that's very generous. I think most 2-year-olds don't need that much. A half hour to an hour is plenty, and they don't need any. But sometimes that's can be used a little bit as a reward too. And I think when you're going back and forth between multiple places. You just have to ask, and it's important to make sure. I always ask my daycare provider at the end of the day if they watched any television or watched a movie while they were there, because then my kids know that eliminates their television time at our house. Yeah.
I've got something. We're having a little bit of an issue, I guess. Generally, it's when her sisters or her grandparents leave, that he gets really, really upset when they leave, or say we leave their house, either way. My question is there a good way to maybe prevent him from becoming so upset? Is there any...
How long does he stay upset? Does he just cry for a few minutes and then it's over? And
It's a good half-hour tantrum.
20 to 30 minutes, yeah.
sometimes we'll even recommend doing some practice of separation for short periods of time and working on not getting upset and then using a reward system for that. So separating themselves from you briefly, even if it's just in the other room, and trying not to get upset. And then if they don't get upset, they can get, again, a sticker charge or something like that. That can be a real problem because it's tough because they probably are truly upset and scared. But you don't want to reinforce that behavior. You can't keep coming back and keep, it's other people.
When his aunts leave, he's really upset that they're gone.
So, you might just use some kind of a reward system. Again, I think just like with bedtime, with naptime, with anything else, if you give them a little forewarning that that's about to happen, that might be helpful too. Another thing that sometimes people will do with family members is like a little photo album that he can have with family members' photos in it that he can go look at when they leave, and that might help. I mean, sometimes it's little things with these little ones that really make a difference. So, yeah.
So you mentioned when they go to bed to read the same books, and that's fine. Does it cognitively stimulate them more? Does research say that if you have more of a variety of books rather than...
It's probably better for their speech development and cognitive development to have a variety, and I still think they should be read more than one book, but I think it's fine if you finish your story time with the same one every night. Sure. So if you're going to read 2 or 3 books, and the last one's always going to be, ours was Guess How Much I Love You. Yeah. But I think that's okay.
Okay.
I think the more books you do and the less TV you do, the better. So I wouldn't, I think you probably want to be reading more than one book a night. But if the final one's the same every time, I don't think that matters. Yeah.
We don't really have a problem with him whining just yet, but I know my nephew, when he was more his age, as he was getting to get his speech better, that he just whined everything, anything and everything he said come out whining, and he can do, like they get upset and stuff, and they get that tone and stuff, and I was just wondering if there's like any suggestions on how to keep from them portraying their feelings in such a manner, not to...
Well, I think some of it's, again, just another one of the irritating, kind of in that category of irritating and annoying things that toddlers do. And a lot of times you can resolve that behavior by ignoring it too, or by telling them that you can't understand them when they're talking in a whiny voice or a baby voice, and that they need to use big kid words. And then you'll be able to understand. I think that's pretty effective usually.
Yeah, my nephew. I haven't talked to him in a couple of years, but even when he was 4 or 5, that he just kept that. But
yeah,
because it's not my kid.
I don't want to stop the question, but for people that need to leave, we're going to do the drawing. Great.
Can we still put, is the other she's in there?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Watch one of us will win.
And we only have to make it. Oh. This first one is for the Skechers gift card.
Okay, Sarah Naziatka.
I'll bring it, or you can go get it. We have a zoo pass.
Ooh. I should have entered.
Sure.
Brandis Adams.
Okay, and another zoo pass.
Kristen Sharp.
Okay, great. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I'll wrap it up. If anybody has any other questions and wants to stay after, I'm happy to answer anything. So, otherwise, thanks for coming.
Thank you.